Welcome to the Holistic Career Change Podcast, one-stop shop for everyone feeling stuck in their career and who are looking to identify, change, and succeed at their new fulfilling work. I'm your host, Dilma Oseita. Let's go. Hi all. How have you been? Are you rested? Are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Are you feeling the joy? I sincerely hope that you are. So I decided to try out releasing podcast episodes every 2 weeks instead of weekly. So last week there was no episode. Now I don't think any of you would mind, or at least I assume so. And the reason why I think so is because I'm an avid podcast listener myself, and I sometimes just get overwhelmed, to be honest, with catching up with all of my favorite weekly podcasts. So I'm hoping you're the same and you won't mind at all having 2 weeks to listen to one of my episodes. If you do mind, and if you would prefer weekly episodes, do also let me know. I'm always open to suggestions. So, as you know, on this podcast, I mostly focus on addressing these most active and often painful aspects of career change and everything that is to do with finding your authentic path. Looking at a career change process in general from a very high level, it may sometimes seem like it's a pretty straightforward process, as in, well, you find what you love and then you switch. Right? And while it may be true for those select few individuals that I'm sure you and I know about, I would say it's more of an exception to the rule rather than the reality of things. And if we look at it from this sort of simplistic view, we will not be realistic, nor will we be truly prepared for what to expect. We will then be just taking a sort of reductionistic approach, which may leave us disillusioned and possibly even more confused in the end, and probably not having arrived to that successful, fulfilling career. The way I see it, career change process is like an iceberg, okay? Work with me with this metaphor here. So the tip of the iceberg is what I often refer to as the mechanics. It's the strategies in the form of networking techniques, prepping your resume, putting together a transition plan, working out your financials, and so on and so forth. These are the tangibles. The information and tactics on how to do all of that is usually easily accessible. It's mostly free of charge, and let's be honest, usually pretty straightforward. No rocket science, and it's available right there, and usually just a few Google searches away. And while it is totally important to be armed with these strategies and tactics, from my experience, these will only carry you so far. Just ask the serial career changers who switch their career every couple of years. It will only take them so far. It's a bit like going out for a hike in the forest with, say, Google Maps on your phone. So you know the directions, you're been given directions by the AI in the maps. However, if your hike is long and God forbid your phone battery dies, you will be lost. So if you're not a scout girl or a scout boy and you don't know how to read nature or read sky for navigation, you're going to be just wandering about trying to find your way out and really not enjoying the process anymore, just running for survival and shelter. Similar with career change process. When we started initially, we might be tempted to think that all we need is the how, the mechanics, the strategies. But if we just blindly follow that compulsion for how, just tell me how, and we don't simultaneously work on building our inner navigation process, and eventually we'll get lost, like we probably have already experienced it on many instances before. So if this time around you're listening to my podcast and you are actually determined to do this differently, I invite you to lean into all of the work and acknowledge that how-tos and all the strategies are often only 1/10 of the work. And if you want a visual, I actually posted an Instagram post about it with an iceberg, and I kind of laid it out beautifully that this work, the strategy is just 1/10. And from my opinion, what is not emphasized enough is that the true determining factor of whether you will even be able to find your authentic path, and whether you'll transition successfully, all of it will be determined by how you navigate around that part of the iceberg which is not visible, the submerged part, hiding in the water. And often we have absolutely no idea just how big and dangerous it may be, and we'll only find out as we approach it. So that biggest chunk of work is actually underwater. And sometimes also you heard me refer to it as the shadow side of career change. It's our mindset errors, limiting beliefs, all kinds of conditioned programming, lack of boundaries, fear-based thinking, and all of the other gremlins that are ready to attack us whenever we launch into doing anything new. You know that our ego loves to identify with status and labels and boxes. So once we start unpacking that, once, that previously stable foundation starts to shake, that's when the true work begins. And that is the point where a lot of career changers will quit thinking that something has gone wrong. So if you've ever questioned why I don't spend more time on the mechanics and giving you tips on, say, how to interview better, that is the reason. Because I don't believe that will determine whether you will land your dream job. And I want to deliver the most value, and I want you to succeed. Whether you're one of my one-on-one clients, or whether you just listen to my podcast and you do the work, on your career switch on your own. I want to deliver value just the same. And I believe that the most valuable tools are the ones that will help you firstly be more aware and help you understand what's actually happening with you as you go through this often very uncertain limbo stage, in-between stage when you are switching career. And that's why I focus on that shadow aspect of career change, the submerged part of the iceberg. If we refuse to address it or ignore it, pretending it's not there, it will simply start hurting us. So I really invite you to not underestimate the importance of this work, so that we don't have to deal with similar consequences like Titanic had to. That's probably an insensitive joke. Okay, I get it. It's a bit dramatic, but listen, I take it really seriously because part of my responsibility is to warn you and prepare you sufficiently to be able to handle this process. Now, having said all of that, and now that I've given you that disclaimer, I feel a little better now addressing the topic for today, which is, while majority of the work is underwater, right, the shadow side, let's be honest, there's still that 1/10 of the iceberg that sometimes needs to be addressed. And we do need certain strategies. And while, like I said, I will not focus on that on my podcast, but I will be covering aspects of, of that part. And I really don't want to come across as completely oblivious to the fact that you still need to do a bit of homework when preparing for your transition. I always invite clients to have timelines and milestones identified. I always invite you to have your financials sorted and any other tangibles taken care of. It's just the reality of things. As much as I will always ask you to dream big and be romantic and authentic, dream authentic, that's one of my podcast episodes that I had, I also invite you to be sensible and smart and strategic about this change. So one of the aspects of the strategy I want to talk to you about today is how you can make the most out of your current position. And I want to share with you a few tips on how to leverage your resignation when the time comes. While it is part of that mechanics, I still want to address it because unless you are like a serial quitter or a serial career changer, the way I call these people who switch careers very often, the chances are quitting a job might not necessarily be a skill that you've had a chance to master in your life. And before I go into it, I firstly would like to invite you to, if you haven't done so yet, go back to my episode 13, which is called I Don't Have Time and Energy to Switch. This is where I share a few reframes and advice on how to embrace your current job, even if you hate it, with all of your being. And I share how to step into gratitude and befriend your current role and company you work for, so that you could reduce that resistance that you feel, which uses a lot of energy, by the way, and so that you could create space and time to prepare for that gradual switch. I don't think you guys truly understand fully just how energy hungry the process of resistance is. Now, imagine, say, a small wooden box with a lid, okay? And imagine that for some reason, you put in a little puppy in there and you close the lid. I'm giving this example and I'm thinking, why would you put a puppy in a wooden box? But work with me with this example, okay? That's just what came. So say you're playing with a puppy and you put him in the box and, there are little holes and everything, so the puppy is not going to suffocate, okay? It's just a little game. But when you close the lid, the puppy, will try to get out, right? It will be jumping in there, bumping probably the lid with its, head and paws. Like, it's just a natural instinct, right? It will not want to be closed in. And imagine you having to hold that lid down, like, for as long as you want the puppy to stay in there. And you will actually have to use your force to hold it down. And say for some reason you had to keep the puppy in there for an hour or two, no idea why again, but work with me. Can you imagine how your whole arm will start feeling tired? Like maybe you will even get spasms, muscle tension. If like the puppy was constantly like bumping the lid, right? And you had to keep it down. You'd be in pain at some point. And, do you think you'd be tired after an hour or two of holding that lid down? Hell yeah, you would. Now imagine having to hold it down all day, every day when you're at work. So while my example may not be perfect, but it kind of hopefully illustrates just how much energy resisting something could take. Even resisting something as intangible as a job you don't like. It could make you chronically tired. So this is all to say that before you go ahead and start plotting how one day you will burst into your boss's office and throw your resignation letter into their faces, no shame if you fantasize about that, by the way. I do remember dream about it every time my boss would upset me with like unreasonable requests. But before you do that, let's get you into a calmer place of acceptance. And once you're there, this is where we can talk strategy for your resignation. I had a one-on-one session with my client a few weeks back, and her and I were discussing how to leverage and make the most out of her current position before she transitions into running her own company full-time, which she is setting up right now on the side of her day job. And at one point, as we were sort of chatting about what additional training she could ask for of her employer, that the employer could potentially finance. And we were talking about, all the other additional projects that she could run to give her access to resources that the company has and experience that she could then repurpose and use for her own company. She said this phrase that made me burst into this roaring laughter. She looked at me with this serious expression on her face and said, "Listen, if I'm going to use my time and my skill set to work for them, they are going to work for me too. You better believe it. We will both be working here." And I feel like she just voiced so perfectly the attitude that I'd like to invite you to take on. We often fall into this almost powerlessness trap, thinking we have no rights, no voice, and no one is interested in the way we perceive our position, the way we feel about our employer or just the workplace in general. And perhaps you haven't even gotten into the habit of using your voice. Maybe you have, but I know that a lot of people don't usually naturally have this ability to do so. Because a lot of us are affected by this narrative, often usually inherited from our parents' generation, that work is essentially sacred and we should just be grateful that we have a job. And we are in no position whatsoever to be dictating the conditions. We put that perceived job security above our needs and wants. And I already spoke about job security in the previous episode. Like it's, really not secure at all when you think about it. So on the contrary to that sort of common narrative, I want you to start stepping into that proactive power position because you are in that position. And let me share with you a few tips on how to make the most out of your current employment while you're still there, and what to do when you start negotiating the terms and conditions of your resignation. Now, for granted, not all of what I'm going to share will necessarily fit your specific situation, but you could definitely take a few of these tips and implement them, or perhaps you'll get inspired to come up with your own version of everything that I share here today with you. So if you still haven't quit your employment, but you are very clear you're going to, and you have this emerging clarity which direction you will be moving next, I'd like to invite you to do a few things. First, review and evaluate your skill set and determine which of it is transferable. I said it many times, chances are majority of it is perfectly applicable to many different industries across a variety of roles. Okay, but you need to actually see it for yourself and do the work to evaluate and determine which ones are transferable for you to gain that confidence and not just blindly follow, what I say, which when I say, listen, 60 to 90% is transferable skills, right? Secondly, I want you to take a look at the new industry or role you're planning to transition into by checking job descriptions of these roles and noticing the skill set and qualifications, that part of the job posting, right? Save these lists from different job ads, review them carefully, and ask yourself whether some of this skill set or qualification could be useful for your current position and current employer. Could it be something you could discuss with your supervisor or HR department to ask to be included in your training and development plan for, say, the next quarter or the next year? Now, some of you would have an issue probably asking for it if you knew that you were planning to leave. However, look at it this way. You have served this company or organization you are part of well. You most likely did at some point overtime. You did not always get paid for it. You did not always get appreciated for the work that you did, etc., right? So training and development is actually a budget line that any respectable company will have in their budget, and money will be allocated to it. And from my experience, that budget line is often not fully taken advantage of. That is, there are often funds left there that are carried forward to the next year. So that means the HR, the senior management do not always have reminding about available training to the employees as a priority. This is totally to be expected. They're worried about their day-to-day responsibilities. And also at the same time, employees are often not proactive enough in asking for that extra training. So why not take advantage of it? And why not ask for it if the money is already allocated for training and certifications? And again, just do not blindly ask for any training, but investigate a little bit what could be useful for your next career adventure. I recall when I was back in management consulting, I was very keen on learning new languages. Okay, I go through these phases. And for some reason, I felt like it would be good for me to learn a little more Russian. So, I was like, listen, that's a language skill. That's a language I know a little bit. So I went to my partner of the firm, of a consultancy, and I literally just sold it to him. I said, listen, I know that the company is looking to expand to the East. And I think it would serve me if my Russian was a little bit better, at least on conversational level. And then I found a few other colleagues who were, also interested in learning some Russian. So the firm in the end hired a Russian teacher for us. And she was coming in twice a week to our office to give us these private Russian language classes, right? All paid by my employer. And by the way, I left 3 months after I finished my lessons, and no one died, no one felt cheated, and I had a good time and expanded my vocabulary. And by the way, adding Russian language skills to my resume did help me land my next role, right? So there was, no hard feelings. Everyone had a good time. So how can you leverage that as well? What training, what courses, what certification could you ask of your current employer while you're still there, especially if your switch is a little bit later down the line and you're planning to stay with them for some time anyway? So that's one side of the things. What can you collect, learn, add to your current knowledge, expertise, and skill set that will serve you moving forward? Another side of things that I too invite you to think about, I'm inviting you to do a lot of things in this episode. So this other piece of advice that I have perhaps is a little more counterintuitive, especially if you've made that internal commitment to leave, right? So you know how when you are, say, on the corporate ladder and in spite of what step or title you're on, if the career path is yours, you will be inevitably looking up at that next step and almost trying on that position for size. So say you look at your boss and his or her daily activities, and you will be saying to yourself, like, I wonder if I could do this job. Would I like this job? Would I perform well under this sort of pressure? And so on and so forth, right? So you are already testing whether you would feel excited to be in that position. You want to be in a career path where you are excited about advancing and becoming your boss. So what if you took on a similar mindset when you are about to leave the company? Again, work with me here. There's a reason why I'm sharing this. You want to leave this current employment on the best terms possible. Now, you may think it's a little foxy, but I'd say it's smart. I want you to look around at your department, at your company, depending on the size, right? It's going to all be different for each of you. What challenges, what inefficiencies you see at your workplace? What are your colleagues dealing with that they're annoyed by? What is your boss facing? Are there any old processes that have to be reviewed and improved? New procedures implemented, something sorted, old pushover tasks that are rolling over from quarter to quarter that no one wants to take care of? How can you be of service? Again, an example from my experience, when I was working in the corporate, flexible working hours and remote working was not a thing. As hard as it is to believe right now, back in the day, it wasn't a thing at all. You had to be in the office strictly Monday to Friday, like rigid working hours and lots of overtime. And I myself, I'm an early riser and I'm mostly productive in the first half of the day. And I had similar colleagues similar to myself. So what would happen is that we would come in at like 8 or 9. We would be productive for several hours. And then, from lunch onwards, we would just be there half asleep, not productive, wanting to procrastinate. It just wasn't working with our internal clock, like this sort of rigid working hours. So what I did is I started negotiating with my boss and then the board member overlooking our department to allow us for more flexible working hours. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. I had to write suggestions to HR department. I agreed to be a trial person to prove to them that my productivity will not suffer if I come to the office at 7 a.m. instead of 9. These legit were the fears, right? And as I started doing this and the senior management relaxed a little bit, that paved the way for others. So I did receive a lot of gratitude. And by the way, I did not do that for that. I did not do that because I want to meet my need for significance or be so cool and have everyone to thank me. No, back then, it wasn't even a strategy of mine, to be honest. It was just me genuinely not liking to come to the office and, spend all that time not being productive when I could actually come in earlier and work in silence for several hours before everyone starts coming into the office and get majority of my work done, right? So another thing that I did is I took on a few projects that my boss did not have time to properly analyze, in particular, what she used to hate is risk management, right? And we worked in a financial institution. Risk management is a big thing. And she was not a risk manager, but she did need to overlook certain processes at the high level, and she hated it. And I'm laughing because in financial sector, there are very few selected individuals who actually enjoy risk management because it's tedious, there's lots of red tape and procedures and so on and so forth. However, I managed to find inspiration in a few aspects of this work, and I started sorting it out for my boss. I just took it on. I said, listen, I see you're busy. Let me help you with this, right? And the amount of gratitude and thanks, again, I received from her just from the few months of work was probably more than I had received, in years of working there. Now, you'd say, why would I waste my time on this? And how is that serving me to really be putting in all that effort as I'm preparing to leave? Well, because you already know you're prepping to leave. You already know you will be there sitting with them, probably negotiating certain terms of resignation. You may need to negotiate, for instance, a flexible contract, or ask them if you could stay part-time as you transition, something I did. And by the way, my efforts in the last months did put me in a better position to leverage my conditions and what I needed, right? You already know you may need to have several people who need to be your cheerleaders should you need to use them as references moving forward. So this is how you position yourself in a win-win scenario. You win and your company wins. Win-win, my favorite. And all of this, by the way, is not to say that you should be manipulative or, unfair, right? It's not to say that you should only start putting in effort just before you prepare to leave. This is assuming that you did perform to your best ability. And I want to draw your attention to that last chapter at this job, because a lot of people are tempted to drop their efforts to just be, off the radar once they know that they're leaving. So they'll probably won't be putting in any extra effort. They will just be doing the bare minimum, already concentrated on the next thing. I see that through. I see it so many times that people do that. I invite you to do the opposite. To quote my favorite, Charles Bukowski, wherever the crowd goes, run in the opposite direction. Well, not always true, but in this case, it might ring true, actually. Okay, so we have these two covered, and I have a few more tangible tips I usually share with my career changers as they are in this stage. First of all, as you're prepping to leave, analyze employee handbook and your employment contract carefully. Now, this one is sort of very straightforward and be like, yeah, Vilma, thanks for the obvious, right? But I really want you to carefully analyze and look for terms related to compensation, benefits, your rights and procedures, including terms related to ending the contract. I even advise sometimes to summarize these all in one comprehensive document and double check that these terms are not contradicting. Because what happens is that they are often very confusing and ambiguous on purpose. Unfortunately, that's the case. It's not in some of the company's best interest for you to clearly understand your rights. There, I said it. Another tip, if there are any past colleagues that you are still in touch with or used to have a great connection with, reach out to them discreetly and ask them to share their sort of exit negotiation process, how it went for them, especially if your employer does not offer sort of a standard package and you see that people leave in different ways with different agreements. So speaking with them will help you get a better idea of what your options may be and how to prepare better. Next, you have to be really clear on your timeline. How long are you planning to stay with this employer? And not only have one ideal timeline, but have several timelines. So one of them would be your ideal scenario. You plan out how long you're going to stay and when you're going to transition. Another timeline, almost like a backup plan, should be, should the employer ask you to stay longer, say until they find someone else to replace you, and so that you could spend time training them, how much longer are you willing to extend your timeline? Have it on your terms. Pre-think. right? So that you would not be in a situation where an employer asks you to stay and you just agree blindly, and then you put yourself in an impossible position where you're stretching yourself and not being able to really focus on your career change properly, and then probably not doing a good job at the workplace that you're planning to leave anyway, right? So knowing your situation and the status of your work relationships that you have, you also need to think whether you will notify your boss informally first before you give in your notice officially. If you're on good terms, would it serve you to let them know in advance so they could plan for the hiring process accordingly? There are no right or wrongs here. It really depends on each case individually. I'm just throwing at you many things for you to consider. So basically, I'm suggesting for you to be in this proactive mode. That is, you don't just hand in your resignation and then you go with the flow and see what happens, but you come in prepared with timeline, with suggestions, especially if you want to ask for a part-time position so that you would have some sort of income coming in while you're building your business or while you're transitioning in your new career and getting some additional qualifications, so on and so forth. So when you have this conversation, make sure you present them from an employer's perspective. That's another good point, right? We're so focused on ourselves sometimes. So we'll come to our boss and we'll be like, this is what I need for me, right? And while it's obvious, not a lot of people actually think that conversation through and prepare to present their suggestion from an employer's perspective. Why would it make sense for them to keep you on the terms that you are suggesting? How could you be useful? How could agreeing to whatever terms you offer them is a no-brainer decision for them? Right? Have you thought about that? How do you deliver your requirements to them? And how do you make it a win-win again for them? The 3 words that I always remind my career changers as they go through this process when they're in this stage is stay considerate, collaborative, and respectful. CCR, if you like abbreviations. This job, whatever it is, has served you beautifully. It supported you through the change. It paid your bills. It bought you nice things. You can choose to be grateful and navigate this situation respectfully. Now, if you ask me for ideal circumstances for someone to transition into a new career, I would probably say it would be the situation where your company is, say, restructuring, and you may have to be laid off as a result. Okay. And here's why I love it. In those situations, employers, by law, in spite of which country you're from, will have to offer severance packages. And a lot of companies actually do not have, a certain policy set in place. And that is good news for you because it means that the terms of that package and of your severance pay is negotiable. Okay. So in the same way you negotiate your starting salary and your raises, you can also negotiate your severance pay agreement when you leave. And that severance pay is often, not always, granted to employers upon termination of employment, and the amount is usually based on your length of employment. You also, by the way, have the right in those instances to negotiate more than just a severance check. And again, this is a very important reminder because people forget that. Some of the things that you may ask is, for instance, additional cash. And you can ask for a lump sum or in a form of an extension of your salary, which, by the way, would be a better option if you don't have the next job lined up and you'd still like to have some sort of money in the form of salary coming into your account every month. You can also ask for insurance and all the other benefits coverage. So for instance, if you are asking for an extension of salary, right, as opposed to them giving you a lump sum and being, shaking hands and saying goodbye, you would say, listen, let's take that sum, divide it into 12 months. How about you pay me that amount monthly? Can we set it up like that so that I receive that money monthly? And what that could also mean is that in that case, they would be able to extend your benefits. So if you decide to take a little break in between jobs, that would be great for you. However, if you're planning to claim unemployment benefits, then I would say opt for a lump payment, receive all the sum, and then, claim your unemployment benefits on top. This is only if you are planning to do so, right? I'm not telling you that you're switching careers, you're going to be unemployed in this doomsday scenario, not at all. I'm just sharing with you the smart ways how to go about it for that in-between stage. If you are not following my process to a T, where I will always tell you only switch gradually and only leave your current position when you have something securely lined up and you have money coming in, right? And obviously, another thing to think about is not to forget about the payout for unused sick and vacation days. And some companies, by the way, will even offer covering the costs of career coaching or new career training if they're letting you go. So knowing all of this, being aware of this, are just really, I would say, savvy ways to check in with what's going on with your current employer and what's available for you should you be let go, right? And by the way, this is by no means an exhaustive list. I'm just throwing some ideas at you, just a few pointers to hopefully inspire you to be resourceful and make the most out of quitting your job and ending this chapter properly with lots of closure on both ends. Believe it or not, but the resignation process can be fun, it can be a connective experience, and it can be financially rewarding as well. All up to you. Wishing you beautiful 2 weeks ahead. Bye. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you'd like to receive additional personalized guidance and be taken through a fail-proof process from the romantic blue sky thinking to the actual specific career and business idea, together with a transition plan to make it a reality, make sure you schedule a consultation call with me. We will review your current situation and discuss how we can set you up to get from where you are to where you need to be in order to be able to live your life at the fullest expression. I invite you to become a shining example of what's possible.